The hallways of Pine Valley High School buzzed with the usual morning chaos. Amidst the sea of trendy backpacks and loud chatter, one student stood out. Mira walked quickly, hugging her worn-out backpack close to her chest. It wasn't just any backpack. It was her latest invention, something she'd spent weeks perfecting in her garage. "Hey look, it's the mad scientist," someone shouted from behind. Mira picked up her pace, pretending not to hear. Her backpack was special. She'd fitted it with solar panels and a charging system that could power phones and tablets. Sure, it looked a bit weird with all those wires and panels sticking out, but she knew it could be something amazing. The morning had started well enough. She'd gotten to school early to test her invention one last time before showing it to her science teacher. The first few tests went perfectly. Her phone charged faster than ever before. But life had other plans for Mira that day. It happened during lunch period. The cafeteria was packed, and Mira sat alone at her usual corner table, spreading out her notes. A group of students from her class watched curiously as she connected her phone to the backpack. "Watch this," she said softly to herself, a small smile playing on her lips. This was her moment to prove everyone wrong. The backpack hummed to life, its indicator lights blinking green. For a brief moment, everything worked perfectly. Then came the crackling sound. Before Mira could react, sparks began shooting from the connection points. Her phone screen went black, and with a loud pop, the main power unit exploded in a shower of bright sparks. Papers flew everywhere. Her lunch tray flipped over, sending her apple rolling across the floor. The cafeteria fell silent for a split second before erupting in laughter. Someone started calling out, "There goes crazy inventor girl again." The nickname spread through the room like wildfire. Red-faced, Mira scrambled to gather her scattered belongings. Her hands trembled as she picked up the pieces of her failed invention. The worst part wasn't the laughter or even the embarrassment. It was seeing her dreams literally fall apart in front of everyone. Mr. Kumar, the janitor who had always been kind to her, quietly helped her clean up the mess. "Don't let them get to you," he whispered, handing her a broom. The greatest inventors failed hundreds of times before getting it right. But as Mira walked home that afternoon, her backpack now a reminder of her public failure, those kind words felt hollow. She had really thought this invention would be different. In her room, she pulled out her notebook, the one filled with sketches and ideas that nobody else understood. Flipping through pages of previous failed attempts, she wondered if everyone was right. Maybe she was just fooling herself. That evening, while helping her mom with dinner, Mira stayed quieter than usual. "Bad day?" her mom asked, chopping vegetables. Mira just nodded, not ready to share the cafeteria disaster story. Her mom paused, putting down the knife. "You know, your grandfather was just like you at your age. Always tinkering, always dreaming up new ideas. People thought he was strange too." Mira looked up, surprised. She'd never heard this about her grandfather before. "Really? What happened to him?" Her mom smiled mysteriously. "That's a story for another day. But remember this, being different isn't wrong. It's just that some people take longer to understand what's special." That night, lying in bed, Mira stared at her ceiling where she'd stuck glow-in-the-dark stars in the pattern of constellations. The backpack disaster still stung, but something had shifted inside her. Tomorrow, she decided, she would start again. Maybe the solar panels needed better insulation, or maybe the power converter needed adjusting. Either way, she wasn't done inventing. Not by a long shot. As she drifted off to sleep, her mind was already sketching out new ideas, improved designs. The laughter in the cafeteria seemed more distant now, overshadowed by the possibilities of what she might create next. After all, every great story has to start somewhere, even if that somewhere is a cafeteria full of mockery and a backpack that wouldn't stop sparking. Rain pattered against the attic window as Mira sorted through dusty boxes. 2 weeks had passed since her grandfather's funeral, and her mom had finally decided it was time to clean out his old things. The attic of their small house had become a treasure trove of memories, filled with items from a life well lived. "Make sure you check everything carefully," her mom called from downstairs. "Your grandfather never threw anything away." Mira picked up another box, this one heavier than the others. As she lifted it, something slipped from between its contents. A leather-bound notebook, its edges worn smooth from years of handling. Curious, she set down the box and picked up the book. The first page bore her grandfather's neat handwriting. "Project notes. Keep private." Mira's heart skipped a beat. She'd always known her grandfather as the neighborhood mechanic who could fix anything, but this was different. As she turned the pages, her eyes widened. The notebook was filled with detailed sketches, complex mathematical equations, and notes written in her grandfather's distinctive style. Some pages had coffee stains on them. Others had greasy fingerprints, signs of late nights spent working on something important. "What's this?" she whispered to herself, tracing her finger over a particularly detailed drawing. It looked like an engine, but unlike any she'd seen before. The design was elegant, innovative. It seemed to solve problems that modern engines still struggled with. A folded blueprint fell from between the pages. Carefully, Mira spread it out on the dusty floor. The paper was yellowed with age, but the drawings were clear. A revolutionary engine design that could run on multiple fuel sources while maintaining incredible efficiency. Her hands trembled slightly as she realized what she was holding. This wasn't just some old mechanic's tinkering. This was groundbreaking work. But why hadn't her grandfather ever shared it? Why had it stayed hidden up here, gathering dust? "Mom," she called out, her voice cracking with excitement. "Mom, come look at this." Footsteps creaked up the attic stairs, and her mom appeared, wiping her hands on her jeans. When she saw what Mira was holding, she went quiet. "Oh," she said softly. "You found his notebook." "Did you know about this?" Mira asked, gesturing to the complex drawings. "Did you know he was working on all this?" Her mom sat down beside her on the dusty floor. "He worked on these designs for years," she explained, gently touching the blueprint. "Every night after closing his shop, he'd stay up late, working on his ideas. But back then, nobody took him seriously. They said he was just a small-town mechanic who should stick to fixing cars." Mira felt a lump form in her throat. It sounded too familiar. The mockery, the dismissal, the loneliness of having ideas that nobody else understood. "Why didn't he ever tell me?" she asked quietly. Her mom smiled sadly. "He was going to. He always said he was waiting for the right time. I think he wanted you to find your own path first, to develop your own ideas before seeing his." As the afternoon light filtered through the dusty attic window, Mira kept reading. Each page revealed more of her grandfather's brilliant mind. Solutions to problems she'd been struggling with in her own inventions, clever workarounds she'd never considered. In the margins of one page, she found a note that made her eyes tear up. "For my granddaughter, who will understand these dreams better than anyone." That evening, Mira set up a small workbench in the corner of her room. She placed her grandfather's notebook carefully on it, next to her own. Looking at them side by side, she could see the similarities in their sketching styles, in the way they approached problems. As she got ready for bed, her mind buzzed with possibilities. Her grandfather's unfinished work wasn't just a legacy. It was an invitation. An invitation to dream bigger, to push further, to finish what he had started. And maybe, just maybe, it was also the key to proving everyone wrong about both of them. The school hallways were plastered with bright yellow posters that seemed to mock Mira as she walked to class. "Young Inventors Competition," they screamed in bold letters. "Grand Prize. Full scholarship to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology." Her heart raced every time she saw one. A full scholarship. It was everything she'd ever dreamed of, everything she'd worked for. But after the solar backpack disaster, the thought of putting herself out there again made her stomach churn. During morning assembly, Principal Wong stood at the podium, practically beaming with excitement. "This is an unprecedented opportunity," she announced. "Our school has been chosen as one of only 5 in the state to participate. The winner will present their invention at the National Science Convention." Whispers filled the auditorium. Mira sank lower in her seat as several students turned to look at her, smirking. She could almost hear their thoughts. "Wonder what explosion crazy inventor girl will come up with this time." At lunch, she sat in her usual corner, her grandfather's notebook hidden beneath her textbooks. She'd been studying his engine design for days now, trying to understand every detail. As she flipped through the pages, a shadow fell across her table. Planning another disaster. It was Raj, the class president and science club leader. His perfect grades and polished presentations had won him every science fair since 6th grade. He peered at her notes, but Mira quickly closed the notebook. "Just homework," she mumbled, but Raj lingered, his eyes narrowing slightly before he walked away. That evening, Mira pulled out her grandfather's blueprint again, spreading it across her bedroom floor. The design was brilliant, but incomplete. Her grandfather had never finished solving the fuel injection system. But what if she could? Her mom found her there hours later, surrounded by papers covered in calculations. "Honey, it's midnight," she said gently. "Mom, I think I'm going to enter the competition," Mira blurted out. "I know everyone thinks I'm just the girl who makes things explode, but I have to try." Her mom sat down beside her, looking at the scattered papers. "Your grandfather entered a competition like this once," she said quietly. "He didn't win, but he always said that trying was more important than winning." The next few weeks became a blur of work. Mira converted half of their garage into a workshop, with her mom's blessing. Every evening after homework, she was there, tinkering, adjusting, failing, and trying again. Her grandfather's notebook became her guide, but she was pushing beyond his original design, adding her own innovations. Word spread around school that she was working on something big. Some students made bets on what would explode first. Others just rolled their eyes when she rushed past them, her hands stained with engine grease, her hair tied back messily. One afternoon, as she worked on a particularly tricky part of the fuel system, Mr. Kumar, the janitor, stopped by. He'd been watching her work through the garage window. "You know," he said, leaning on his broom, "I used to be an engineer back in my country. Those calculations you're doing, they remind me of something we worked on in my old lab." Mira looked up, surprised. For the next hour, Mr. Kumar shared stories about his own engineering days, offering suggestions that made her rethink several problems she'd been stuck on. As the competition deadline drew closer, Mira's prototype began taking shape. It wasn't pretty, all exposed pipes and rough welds. But when she tested it for the first time, something amazing happened. It worked. Not perfectly, not yet, but it worked. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her mind kept racing with improvements, adjustments, possibilities. The mockery at school didn't stop, but somehow it bothered her less now. Every smirk, every whispered comment just made her work harder. In her desk drawer, she kept the registration form for the competition. She'd filled it out weeks ago, but hadn't submitted it yet. Now, reading it one more time, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: confidence. Tomorrow, she decided, she would hand it in. Let them laugh. Let them make their jokes. She had her grandfather's legacy, Mr. Kumar's encouragement, her mom's support, and most importantly, she had her own determination. For the first time, she realized that might be enough. The school science fair buzzed with excitement. 2 weeks before the big competition, everyone was showing off their projects. Mira stood in the back, clutching her presentation folder. She hadn't brought her engine prototype. It wasn't quite ready. but she had detailed drawings and preliminary test results to share. "Next up," announced Mrs. Chen, the science teacher, "Raj will present his project." Mira's heart stopped as Raj walked to the front of the room, wheeling in something covered by a cloth. His usual confident smile seemed different today, almost smug. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, pulling off the cloth with a flourish, "I present to you the future of transportation. A multi-fuel hybrid engine that could revolutionize how we power our vehicles." The room spun around Mira. There, on Raj's table, sat a prototype that looked eerily similar to her grandfather's design. The same intake system, the same innovative fuel delivery method. Even some of the calculations written on his presentation board matched her notes exactly. "As you can see," Raj continued smoothly, "the unique fuel injection system allows for unprecedented efficiency." Mira's hands shook as she flipped through her presentation folder. Those were her modifications to her grandfather's design. The improvements she'd worked on during lunch breaks, the calculations she'd solved late at night, all there on Raj's board. She thought back to all those times she'd caught him lingering near her lunch table, how he always seemed to be around when she was working on her calculations. She'd been so focused on her work, she hadn't noticed him studying her notes. After the presentation, while everyone crowded around Raj's prototype, Mira slipped out into the empty hallway. She slid down against the lockers, her folder falling open beside her. Weeks of work, her grandfather's legacy, all stolen and presented as someone else's brilliant idea. Mr. Kumar found her there, still sitting on the floor. Without a word, he sat down beside her, his janitor's keys jingling softly. "You know," he said after a while, "when I was working as an engineer, something similar happened to me. A colleague took credit for my research." Mira looked up, wiping her eyes. "What did you do?" He smiled gently. "I started over, created something even better. Because you see, they can steal your ideas, but they can't steal what's in here." He tapped his temple. "They can't steal your understanding, your passion, your ability to innovate." That evening, Mira spread out all her materials on her bedroom floor, her grandfather's notebook, her own notes, and her prototype designs. Her mom brought her dinner, but she barely touched it. "I can talk to the teachers," her mom offered, worried about the dark circles under her daughter's eyes. Mira shook her head. "No," she said firmly. "Mr. Kumar is right. I need to make something better." She opened her grandfather's notebook to a section she'd barely looked at before, pages filled with experimental energy concepts he'd never had time to develop. As she read deeper into the night, an idea began to form. What if, instead of just improving the engine, she completely reimagined it? Her grandfather had sketched some theories about combining different types of sustainable energy, ideas that had seemed too ambitious before. The next morning, Mira walked into school different. When people tried to talk to her about Raj's presentation, she just smiled quietly. During lunch, she sat at her usual table, but instead of working on her old designs, she started fresh. Her new sketches looked nothing like the stolen design. This was something entirely new, born from her grandfather's wildest dreams and her own determination to rise above the theft. Late that night, as she worked in the garage, she found a note tucked into the back of her grandfather's notebook that she'd never noticed before. The best ideas don't come from playing it safe. They come from daring to try what everyone else thinks is impossible. Looking at her new designs, Mira felt a surge of excitement. Raj might have stolen her old project, but he had no idea what she was capable of creating. Sometimes, she realized, the worst setbacks lead to the biggest breakthroughs. And this breakthrough was going to change everything. The garage had become Mira's second home. Tools scattered across workbenches, blueprint papers taped to walls, and the smell of coffee mixing with machine oil filled the air. She discovered a hidden section in her grandfather's notebook, tucked behind what looked like a blank page. The ideas, they were different. Bolder, more innovative than anything she'd seen before. "You've been in here for hours," her mom said, bringing her a sandwich. "Have you slept at all?" Mira shook her head, not looking up from the complex diagram she was drawing. Dark circles under her eyes showed her exhaustion, but there was a new energy in her movements. The competition was just days away. Her new design wasn't just an engine anymore. It was something entirely different. She'd found her grandfather's notes about combining solar power with other renewable energy sources. While everyone else was focusing on single energy sources, she was creating something that could adapt and switch between multiple sustainable powers. At school, rumors spread about her new project. "I heard she's lost it completely," someone whispered as she walked past, her clothes stained with grease. "Working day and night in that garage." But this time, the whispers didn't bother her. Each failed attempt taught her something new. When the first prototype sparked and smoked, she discovered a flaw in the power conversion system. When the second one wouldn't start at all, she realized she needed to redesign the energy storage unit. Mr. Kumar started dropping by regularly, bringing his engineering experience and hot cups of chai tea. "Look at this connection here," he'd suggest, pointing to her diagrams. "What if you tried a different angle?" One night, after another failed test, Mira found herself reading through her grandfather's personal notes. Between the technical drawings, he'd written about his own struggles. Day 67. Another failure. "The town thinks I'm crazy, but I'm getting closer. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come right after the worst failures." Those words gave her strength. The next morning, despite having barely slept, she had a breakthrough. The problem wasn't in combining the different energy sources, it was in how they transitioned between each other. She'd been trying to make them work together all at once, when they needed to flow seamlessly from one to another. "Mom," she called out excitedly. "Mom, come look." Her mother rushed into the garage to find Mira standing over her latest prototype. It wasn't pretty, made from recycled parts and rough welds. But when Mira flipped the switch, something amazing happened. The machine hummed to life, smoothly switching from solar to kinetic energy, then to its backup sustainable fuel source. "It works?" Mira whispered, then louder, "It actually works." Her mom hugged her tightly, not minding the grease stains on her clothes. "Your grandfather would be so proud." The next few days were a blur of fine-tuning and testing. She barely noticed when people at school laughed at her disheveled appearance or made jokes about her crazy inventor reputation. None of that mattered anymore. The night before the competition, she couldn't sleep. Her mind kept racing through all the technical details, all the things that could go wrong. Sitting at her desk, she pulled out her grandfather's notebook one more time. On the last page, she found a note she hadn't seen before. "To whoever finds these ideas, remember that true innovation doesn't come from following others' paths. It comes from daring to create your own." Looking at her prototype, now carefully packed for tomorrow's presentation, Mira felt a strange calm settle over her. This wasn't just about winning anymore. This wasn't even about proving Raj wrong. This was about showing the world what happens when you dare to think differently. As she finally drifted off to sleep, her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. Tomorrow would change everything. Not because of the competition, but because she'd finally found the courage to create something truly her own. The convention center buzzed with nervous energy. Hundreds of students from different schools had gathered for the Young Inventors competition, their projects displayed on tables throughout the massive hall. Mira stood beside her table, her hands shaking slightly as she made final adjustments to her prototype. "Nervous?" her mom asked, helping her arrange her presentation materials. "A little," Mira admitted, watching as judges moved from table to table, clipboards in hand. She'd spent the morning setting up her display, making sure every diagram was perfectly placed, every component of her hybrid energy system clearly labeled. 2 tables down, Raj was already presenting to the judges. His voice carried across the hall, confident and smooth as he explained his engine design. A small crowd had gathered around him, nodding impressively at his polished presentation. "Remember," her mom whispered, squeezing her hand, "you know this inside and out. Just tell them your story." The judges approached her table, three serious-looking engineers from major technology companies. Mira took a deep breath, remembering her grandfather's words about innovation and courage. "Good morning," the lead judge said, adjusting her glasses. "Please tell us about your project." Mira's voice trembled at first as she began explaining her hybrid energy system. But as she got into the technical details, something changed. This wasn't just memorized facts. This was her passion, her journey, her breakthrough. The key innovation, she explained, pointing to her prototype, isn't just in combining different energy sources. It's in how they transition. She demonstrated the smooth switch from solar to kinetic energy, then to the backup sustainable fuel source. One of the judges raised his eyebrows. "This transition system, it's quite unique. How did you develop it?" Mira smiled, thinking of all those late nights in the garage. "Actually, it came from a failure. I kept trying to make all the energy sources work together at once, but then I realized they needed to flow into each other like a dance." The judges exchanged looks. They began asking more technical questions, drilling deeper into the science behind her invention. With each answer, Mira's confidence grew. She understood every aspect of her creation, not just what it did, but why it worked the way it did. From the corner of her eye, she could see Raj watching, his confident smile fading slightly as the judges spent more and more time at her table. When one judge asked about the efficiency ratings, Raj stepped closer to listen. "The overall efficiency is 47% higher than traditional single-source systems," Mira explained, pulling up her test data. "And because it can switch between energy sources based on availability, it never loses power." "Impressive," the female judge murmured, making notes on her clipboard. "And you developed this entirely on your own." Mira thought about her grandfather's notebook, about Mr. Kumar's advice, about her mom's unwavering support. "I had inspiration," she said honestly. "But the design and execution are original." As she demonstrated the final feature, an emergency backup system that could generate power from virtually any sustainable source, she noticed something surprising. Other students had gathered around her table, watching with genuine interest. Some of them were even taking notes. The same classmates who had once laughed at her crazy inventions were now asking questions about her design. Even some of the other judges had wandered over to watch her presentation. When she finished, the lead judge smiled. The first real smile Mira had seen from her all day. "Thank you," she said warmly. "This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we've been looking for." As the judges moved on to the next table, Mira caught her mom's eye. They both knew something had changed. Win or lose, she had shown everyone exactly what she was capable of. Standing there beside her invention, surrounded by curious peers and impressed professionals, Mira finally understood what her grandfather had meant in his notes. True innovation wasn't about proving others wrong. It was about proving yourself right. The convention center fell silent as everyone gathered for the awards ceremony. Hundreds of young inventors sat with their families, all eyes fixed on the stage where the judges stood with their results. Mira's mom held her hand tightly as they waited. "Before we announce the winners," the lead judge began, "I want to say that this year's entries showed exceptional creativity and innovation. The future of science and technology is bright with minds like yours leading the way." Mira barely heard the third and second place announcements. Her heart was pounding too loudly in her ears. She thought about her journey, from the embarrassing cafeteria incident to the late nights in the garage, from the theft of her original design to the breakthrough that led to something even better. And now, the lead judge smiled, holding up the golden envelope, the first place winner of this year's Young Inventors competition, receiving a full scholarship to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The pause seemed to last forever. for her revolutionary hybrid energy system that could change the future of sustainable power. Mira. The room erupted in applause. For a moment, Mira couldn't move. Her mom was hugging her, crying happy tears. Around her, people were standing, clapping, some even cheering. As she walked to the stage, her legs shaking slightly, she caught glimpses of familiar faces. Mr. Kumar was beaming from the back of the room. Her classmates who had once mocked her were now watching with a mix of surprise and respect. Even Raj managed a small nod of acknowledgement. "Your invention shows exactly what we were looking for," the lead judge said as she handed Mira the trophy. "Not just innovation, but a deep understanding of the science behind it. You've created something that could genuinely help solve our energy crisis." Standing at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, Mira pulled out her grandfather's worn notebook from her pocket. "I'd like to dedicate this award to my grandfather," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "He taught me that being different isn't a weakness, it's a gift, and that true innovation comes from daring to think differently." After the ceremony, people crowded around her display table. Local news reporters wanted interviews, industry professionals handed her their business cards, and younger students asked for advice on their own inventions. But the most surprising moment came when 3 elderly gentlemen approached her table. "We worked with your grandfather," one of them said, smiling warmly, "at his repair shop. He used to tell us about his ideas, but we never fully understood them until now. You've brought his dreams to life." That evening at home, Mira sat in the garage looking at her winning prototype. Her mom had insisted on ordering pizza to celebrate, and Mr. Kumar had joined them, bringing a box of special chai tea. "What's next?" her mom asked, watching as Mira already started sketching new improvements to her design. "Everything," Mira smiled. "This is just the beginning." Later that night, she placed her trophy on the shelf next to an old photo of her grandfather in his repair shop. Next to it, she put his notebook and her own, side by side. In her notebook's latest entry, she wrote, "Day 1 of the next chapter. Today I learned that sometimes the people who mock you are the ones who push you to prove just how amazing you can be." The next morning at school was different. The whispers in the hallway had changed from mockery to admiration. Several students asked if they could join her at lunch to learn more about her invention. The science teacher asked if she would consider mentoring younger students. But the biggest change wasn't in how others saw her, it was in how she saw herself. Standing by her locker, she noticed a small dent from where she'd once slammed it in frustration after being teased. Now it just made her smile. Because sometimes life's greatest victories don't just come from proving others wrong. They come from discovering just how right you were to believe in yourself all along.